Imagine a world where nothing ever went extinct. A world where every creature that ever lived still lives. In the early 1800s, this wasn't just a fantasy. It was the prevailing scientific belief. The idea that entire species could simply vanish was radical, even laughable. It took a young woman combing the crumbling cliffs of England's coast to find the monsters that would prove everyone wrong. You know, science isn't some dusty old book of facts, it's more like a detective story, a messy, sprawling epic with missing pages, surprise witnesses, and plot twists that change everything. In the story of life on Earth, paleontologists are the detectives, trying to piece together a puzzle that's billions of years in the making. But what happens when a piece of evidence doesn't just fill in a gap, but flips the entire table over? Today we're digging into 5 discoveries that did exactly that. These aren't just old bones, they're game changers. Fossils that forced scientists to rip up their textbooks, erase their drawings, and admit they got it spectacularly wrong. From sea monsters that weren't supposed to exist to a dinosaur's thumb spike being mistaken for a nose horn, this is the story of how paleontology corrects itself, one groundbreaking fossil at a time. Our story starts in the coastal town of Lyme Regis, England, with a woman named Mary Anning. Born in 1799, Anning wasn't some wealthy gentleman scholar. She was a working-class woman with an uncanny knack for finding fossils. At the time, the scientific establishment basically thought the world was static. The weird bones people were finding, they were often just explained away as the remains of elephants or oddly shaped crocodiles. Then in 1811, when she was only 12, Mary and her brother Joseph uncovered the first complete skeleton of an ichthyosaurus. It was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It had the body of a fish, the snout of a dolphin, and a reptilian skull packed with sharp teeth. It looked like absolutely nothing on Earth. A few years later, in 1823, she did it again, this time discovering the first complete plesiosaurus. This was the legendary sea dragon, a bizarre creature with an absurdly long neck on a turtle-like body, paddling with 4 powerful flippers. These discoveries sent a shockwave through the scientific community. They weren't just oddities, they were proof of entire ecosystems of animals that had lived and died out long before humans. Anning's fossils provided some of the first undeniable evidence for extinction, a concept that was still incredibly controversial. Her finds helped kickstart the science of paleontology, forcing a total shift in how people thought about the planet's history. The world, it turned out, was far older and had been home to far stranger creatures than anyone had ever imagined. The age of monsters was real, and Mary Anning was the one who found it. Next up, we have one of the very first dinosaurs ever named, and also one of the first to be completely and hilariously misunderstood, Iguanodon. In 1822, an English doctor and fossil enthusiast named Gideon Mantell was shown some very large, very strange teeth. Noticing they looked a bit like the teeth of a modern iguana, he figured they must have belonged to a giant, extinct reptile. He called it Iguanodon, which means iguana tooth. This was only the second dinosaur ever scientifically described, so trying to reconstruct it with just a few teeth and bone scraps was like trying to build a car with only a spark plug and a hubcap. Mantell, and later the famous anatomist Sir Richard Owen based their vision of Iguanodon on the biggest animals they knew, rhinos and elephants. They imagined a colossal four-legged lizard-like beast. And that peculiar spiky bone they found, well, just like a rhino, they stuck it right on its nose. This image of a lumbering rhino-horned monster became iconic, even getting immortalized in the famous Crystal Palace dinosaur sculptures. The image was powerful, it was authoritative, and it was dead wrong. The big reveal came in 1878 when an incredible discovery was made in a coal mine in Bernissart, Belgium. Miners stumbled upon dozens of complete iguanodon skeletons perfectly preserved over 1,000 feet underground. These fossils finally told the true story. Iguanodon didn't walk on four legs, it was mostly bipedal, walking on its powerful hind legs. Its tail wasn't dragged on the ground, it was held stiffly behind it for balance. And that famous nose horn, it was actually a thumb spike, a nasty weapon for self-defense. The Bernissart fossils forced a total redesign, changing Iguanodon from a slow-horned lizard into the dynamic animal we know today. It was a humbling but crucial lesson for the young science. A few bones can tell a story, but a whole skeleton reveals the truth. Just 2 years after Charles Darwin published his world-changing book, On the Origin of Species, in 1859, the fossil record delivered what can only be described as the perfect clapback to his critics. Darwin himself admitted that one of the biggest holes in his theory of evolution was the lack of transitional fossils. Fossils that showed one kind of animal evolving into another. Then in 1861, out of a limestone quarry in Germany, a creature called Archaeopteryx showed up. The fossil was stunning, preserving not just bones but the unmistakable impressions of feathers. And it was a bizarre mosaic of features. It had feathers and a wishbone, just like a modern bird. But it also had a full set of sharp teeth, claws on its wings, and a long, bony tail, all classic features of a small dinosaur. It was, quite literally, the missing link that doubters had been demanding. Was it a bird? Was it a dinosaur? The confusing answer seemed to be yes. The discovery caused an instant uproar. Darwin's biggest fans, like Thomas Henry Huxley, held up Archaeopteryx as undeniable proof of evolution in action, showing how birds had evolved from reptilian ancestors. Others were so skeptical they claimed the feathers had to be fakes, a charge that was later completely debunked. Archaeopteryx shattered the neat and tidy classifications of the time, proving that the lines between major animal groups weren't so clear-cut. It gave Darwin's theory powerful physical evidence right when it was being most fiercely attacked. While today we think it's more of an evolutionary cousin than a direct ancestor to all birds, Archaeopteryx remains one of the most important fossils ever found. A perfect snapshot of evolution caught in the act. For a long time, the story of early life seemed pretty simple. Scientists thought it evolved slowly and steadily from simple little blobs into the more familiar animal groups we see today. But in 1909, a paleontologist named Charles Doolittle Walcott stumbled upon a fossil bed high in the Canadian Rockies that basically threw a bomb into that idea. It was called the Burgess Shale. The fossils Walcott found were from the Cambrian period over 500 million years ago. But what was so mind-blowing was their preservation. The fine-grained silt had preserved not just shells and bones but soft tissues, revealing a lost world of bizarre creatures that broke all the rules. These weren't simple primitive ancestors, this was a full-blown explosion of weird and complex life. There was hallucigenia, a creature so strange it was first reconstructed upside down and walking on its defensive back spikes. There was Anomalocaris, a meter-long swimming predator that looked like a cross between a shrimp and a squid, with spiky appendages and giant compound eyes. And there was the five-eyed Opabinia, which had a frontal nozzle that looked like a vacuum cleaner hose. These creatures were so alien they didn't fit into any known animal groups. It was like evolution threw a wild party, tried out a bunch of crazy body plans, and then most of them just vanished. Walcott himself, stuck in the conventional thinking of his day, tried to cram all his bizarre finds into existing modern groups. It took scientists decades to go back and realize what the Burgess Shale truly represented. It showed that the history of life wasn't a neat, predictable march of progress. It was a chaotic explosion of diversity, full of wonderful, weird, and frankly terrifying forms, most of which were evolutionary dead ends. The Burgess Shale proved that the early branches on the tree of life were way stranger and far bushier than anyone had dared to imagine. Our final discovery brings us into the modern era and completely changes the look of the most famous prehistoric animals of all, the dinosaurs. For over 150 years since the time of Iguanodon, dinosaurs were always shown as scaly, lizard-like monsters. This was the undisputed image burned into our brains by movies, toys, and books. That all changed in the 1990s with a flood of incredible discoveries from Liaoning province in China. Because of the area's unique geology, where volcanic ash perfectly preserved soft tissues, paleontologists started finding fossils that shook the field to its core. They found dinosaurs, covered in feathers. It started with Sinosauropteryx in 1996, a small carnivore with a coat of simple hair-like feathers. Then came a flood of others like Caudipteryx and Protarchaeopteryx, which had more complex bird-like feathers on their arms and tails. These weren't birds. They were 100% non-avian dinosaurs. The evidence was undeniable. Feathers didn't evolve for flight. They were an ancient trait that dinosaurs had first, likely for insulation or for showing off, and only much later were they adapted for flying. These discoveries were the final nail in the coffin for the old, scaly dinosaur idea, and cemented the link first hinted at by Archaeopteryx. They proved that birds aren't just descended from dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, a living branch of the dinosaur family tree. This has forced a complete artistic and scientific reboot of what we think dinosaurs looked like. Velociraptors are now known to have had full, feathered arms. Even cousins of the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex are now thought to have sported at least some feathers. The scaly monsters of our childhoods have been replaced by a menagerie of fluffy, feathered, and far more bird-like animals. A dramatic plot twist that's still unfolding with every new fossil that comes out of the ground. From sea monsters that proved extinction was real, to a misplaced thumb that totally changed a dinosaur's look. These stories show that science is never finished. It's always a process of discovery, debate, and most importantly, correction. What do you think is the most mind-blowing correction in paleontology history? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love stories about how science rewrites itself, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of life on Earth. The history of paleontology is just packed with these aha moments where a single fossil can challenge everything we thought we knew. What these 5 discoveries really show us isn't that past paleontologists were dumb, but that science is a fundamentally human process. It moves forward by questioning old ideas when new evidence comes to light. Every mistake was just a necessary step on the path to a clearer, more accurate picture of the prehistoric world. The fossils themselves are the ultimate storytellers, and the best part? We know there are still more plot twists buried in the rock, just waiting to be discovered.